will join us here on stage. Welcome to Carleton University and this important event, Journalists and Online Hate, What to Do When the Battlefield is Everywhere. My name is Alan Thompson. I'm the head of Carleton's journalism program. And on behalf of the School of Journalism and Communication, I want to thank you for taking the time to join us for this critical discussion, either in person or on YouTube. And right off the top, I need to warn you that you're going to hear some harsh, disturbing language this evening. There really isn't any other way to have this conversation. Let me begin with the land acknowledgement. We hear these more and more often these days, but I'm increasingly conscious as a fifth-generation settler and someone who is called upon to make these land acknowledgements, that they sometimes seem to be much more for the white audience, to justify or maybe soothe our racial guilt, instead of the original intended purpose to acknowledge and honor people and the treaty agreements and unceded lands that we occupy. So please, let this not be just another box to check off in our meeting agenda. As journalists or journalists in training, we want to use this moment as a reminder to prioritize our individual commitments to challenge and dismantle white supremacist colonial mindsets, which we have internalized, both collectively and individually, in the School of Journalism itself and in the wider journalism industry in Canada. I know acknowledgements can be seen as just words, but they are important words, made more powerful if they are accompanied by action. On that note, I'm pleased to share that the School of Journalism and Communication is now in the final stages of the hiring process for a new permanent position on our faculty in Indigenous journalism and storytelling. Later this month, we're hosting a special screening of a documentary marking the anniversary of the Idle No More movement. With that, I would like to acknowledge that today we live, gather, and organize on the unceded and traditional territory of the Algonquin peoples. We are here this evening as part of an effort to grapple with the upsurge in online hate targeting journalists. Here at Carleton, our starting point is the view that more must be done to combat the targeted online abuse increasingly suffered by journalists, especially women and racialized journalists. A year ago, Carleton partnered with the Canadian Association of Journalists to host a roundtable on journalists and online hate. That resulted in a call to action to our industry, government, and the broader public through a publication, Poisoned Well. More recently, the CBC's Omaira Issa dedicated a part of her Kesterton lecture at Carleton in this room to her own experience with relentless online hate and death threats. We know online harassment affects journalists, and we have evidence to prove it. The landmark Taking Care survey and report produced earlier this year by my Carleton colleague Matthew Pearson and CBC News journalist and well-being champion Dave Seglins. That survey found that 56%, more than half of Canadian media workers, reported being harassed or threatened on social media, and 35%, more than a third, said they also experienced harassment while working in the field. In the coming months, Professor Trish Odette-Longo is coordinating a series of workshops and discussions for journalism faculty and students to build their digital security knowledge and skills. We must incorporate these skills into the way we teach journalism. This evening, Carleton is working together with CBC Radio Canada, the #NotOK project, and the Stursberg family on this event to continue the discussion. I believe Richard Stursberg was going to join us, but John Maas, who's the grandson in the Stursberg family, is here. It was actually Richard's suggestion that we hold this event, so I wanted to recognize him and the family for their support. Before I turn things over to our moderator, CTV Ottawa Bureau Chief Joyce Napier, let me give you a quick sense of how the evening will unfold. In a moment, Joyce will introduce our platform guests, Catherine Tate, President and CEO of the CBC, Sonia Verma, Editor-in-Chief of Global News. They'll both be making some opening remarks from the podium. then take some questions from Joyce and from the audience before we turn to the second part of the evening. I'm also aware that Catherine has another commitment and may not be able to stay with us throughout the entire evening. After those opening remarks, there will be a short pause. We will take just a moment to let you have a stretch while we reconfigure the stage slightly. See, I've talked long enough that they've arrived. We'll reconfigure the stage slightly for the second part of the evening. And you guys should go over here and get mic'd up. Sorry for that. There will be a panel discussion involving 3 journalists who've had direct experience with online hate. Joyce is going to make all the proper introductions. And they'll be followed by another guest, Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino. After they make some brief comments and have a chance to discuss, we will open the floor to questions. For those who are in the room, you are welcome to use one of the microphones to put a question. The usual rules apply. A question, in case you're wondering, is a sentence that has a question mark at the end of it. In case anyone needs a primer, we're looking for questions. For those who are watching remotely on YouTube, you can use the slido.com site to submit a question, and you will see instructions on the screen. And indeed, at various points, the QR code for Slido is going to pop up in the room. If anyone in the room is more comfortable just putting their question online, feel free to do that as well. And with that, let me turn things over to our moderator for the evening, CTV Ottawa Bureau Chief Joyce Napier.
So, good evening, everybody. I'm Joyce Napier, CTV Bureau Chief here in Ottawa on the Parliamentary Bureau. I am really delighted to be here and like to welcome the people that came here today in person and those who will be following us online as well. And, you know, it's nice to see so many people here on a school night, and, you know, it's cold outside. I hope you're comfortable in your chairs because, you know, the topic that we will be discussing tonight is a very uncomfortable one. Journalists and online hate. So, yeah, that's hate. That means threats. Death threats too. Harassment, bullying, racist, misogynistic. Women are the favored targets of this hate, especially racialized women. So think about it just for 1 second. This is happening now, here in Canada. And, you know, to many that are not here perhaps today, it is something that is a remote topic that some people talk about, but it is getting bigger and bigger and more dangerous. So these kind of panels will help, you know, us all understand what is this, and the minister's here to tell us how do we counter it. Here are the journalists. So before we begin, I want to introduce you again. On this side, you will hear from the president and CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, Catherine Tate, Sonia Verma here, first editor-in-chief of Global News, but before we start, I do want to introduce, our journalists. So Erica Eiffel here is a journalist, a columnist for The Hill Times. Saba Aitazaz, I don't know if she can see us. Alan, is she?
Saba's on Zoom.
Okay, so Saba's on Zoom. Welcome, Saba.
There she is.
There she is. Hello, Saba. And Rachel Gilmore is a reporter for Global News. So this is, you know, I don't want to spend too much time because you want to be hearing from them. Don't be shy. Please ask questions. I had a journalism professor who told me once there are no foolish questions, only foolish answers. Actually, sometimes there are foolish questions, but don't be shy and please ask. This is why we're here today. So without further ado, Catherine Tate.
Good evening, bonsoir. Thank you for that introduction, Joyce. Mr. Minister, great that you're here with us tonight. Alan Thompson, thanks for the great work in organizing this event. And of course, thank you to Richard Stursberg and the family for giving us this opportunity. One of the most important things we can be doing, apart from the practical stuff that we're trying to do to combat online harm, is to be talking about it. And thanks to the generosity of the journalists here tonight who are willing to talk about and share their experiences. So it's a pleasure to be here at Carleton, which obviously has been an incredibly rich training ground for so many of Canada's finest journalists. And I know there are many students here tonight online, perhaps the future host of The Current, perhaps the future host of Power in Politics, and perhaps the future host of Front Burner, or any number of our shows are here in the crowd. Il y a peut-être aussi des francophones qui aspirent à travailler au micro d'ici première ou sur le plateau du téléjournal. Last year, Reporters Without Borders found that an overwhelming majority of journalists agreed that the internet was the most dangerous place for journalists. Nearly half of women journalists said they self-censored to avoid exposing themselves to violence. Another 21% had resigned or were considering not renewing their contracts. All news organizations, and you've got us pretty well, a lot of us represented here tonight, in Canada, across Canada and around the world, have been alarmed by the galloping increase in vitriolic online harm that targets disproportionately, as Joyce has said, women of color, and racialized journalists. We know that the sole purpose of this vile form of harassment is to silence these voices, to silence these journalists, and in so doing, to undermine the foundational pillar in our open societies, in our democracies. So I'm here tonight to say to all of you, stay the course. I know that may seem contradictory. We need fiercely independent, outspoken journalists more than ever before. Journalists who speak truth to power, journalists who reflect a wide range of voices and perspectives. Without a strong, free, and diverse press, democracies cannot function. So this evening, I want to tell you what we're doing at CBC Radio-Canada to address online harm and what else is necessary to combat this issue, which we know has real-life consequences for the very survival of our democracy. Last year, with news partners from across the country and around the world, CBC Radio-Canada launched, I think it's here, not okay, hashtag not okay, hashtag c'est assez. And this was an initiative, and is a living initiative, to bring attention to the issue of online harm and to focus, really importantly, on concrete solutions. We started with a forum where we invited speakers from across the country and around the world to talk about the real-life experience, but really the purpose of hashtag not okay is to focus on solutions. We conducted an industry-wide survey on the depth of the problem in Canada, and the findings are sobering. We are not immune in this country. Anybody who thinks that somehow we're special, we're not. 3/4 of journalists in our Canadian survey and media professionals have experienced some form of harassment in Canada. And 1 in 5 are harassed online on a weekly or daily basis. And again, women, Indigenous, racialized, and LGBTQ2+ journalists are attacked more frequently and more viciously. So we worked together with the Toronto Star, CTV News, Global, La Presse, APTN, the Canadian Association of Journalists, and others to develop a newsroom guide for managing online harm. I urge you all to take a look at it. It's available on hashtag not okay. And the idea was to at least, and it's, by the way, this isn't written by CBC, this is written by a collective, so I don't know how many pens were in it, but a lot. And the idea was to provide advice on what to do before, during, and after incidents of online harassment or abuse. And basically, we've had to adapt many of the same practices that we've used when we send journalists overseas to war zones, or when we send them to natural disasters. This is a really important point. Social media can be as dangerous an environment as hostile physical environments. We take precautions when we send reporters to Ukraine, and we need to take precautions when our people, our journalists, are similarly exposed to danger in the digital world. In the new year, we'll be releasing the results of another study, this time with Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto, and that's really to focus on mental health issues. We know from the preliminary findings that journalists who are harassed online have significantly more symptoms of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic distress. Post-traumatic stress. Take a moment to consider that. For journalists today, the battlefield is everywhere. So what can we do? CBC Radio-Canada is pushing, I've met with all the social media platforms at the senior levels to enforce their own guidelines and take quicker action to remove toxic messages. Obviously, it's an after the fact effort. We're not obviously able to get to them before the fact. That's another matter, and we're working on that as well. We're encouraging police across the country to treat online abuse the same way they treat child pornography, as a cybercrime that crosses police jurisdictions and so requires a coordinated response. And we've been speaking with the federal government to join efforts underway in other countries to protect journalists in legislation. And certainly the presence of the Minister of Public Safety, Minister Mendocino, here tonight underscores the government's commitment to this issue. So I realize that these longer-term solutions may not relieve the immediate damage of online harm. In the end, society will need to change to ensure that this behavior is simply deemed unacceptable, just as human trafficking and drunk driving are. This will require a huge shift in societal attitude and behavior, and I do believe that attitudes about online harassment can shift. The more we all talk about it, the more we flag it as an issue. But there must be penalties also for those who refuse to stop, and that's why we need legislation to ensure online safety. So we'll be working with other media colleagues, many of whom are here tonight, but across the country, to better support and protect our journalists, because until you are safe, we will not stop talking about this. We simply cannot afford to lose your voices. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for inviting me to come and speak. And it's so nice to step out of the newsroom to actually speak to students and other members of the community, I think, who about topics like this, which are so important. And to pick up on something that Catherine was talking about, she was talking about how really some of the lessons that we have been learning, I think, in our newsrooms these days about online hate do resemble what it's like to actually be a journalist in hostile environments. Before I joined Global News about 2 years ago, I was one of those journalists who would go to some of these crazy places and cover wars and cover revolutions. And I think that for me, I know what sort of it feels like to feel really scared and to feel like you're under attack. And of course, this is, I think, really relevant to some of the things that our colleagues here on the stage have gone through. I think that one of the hardest experiences that I've had was in Tahrir Square, where I was covering the revolution in 2011 actually, and this was the revolution where Hosni Mubarak eventually resigned. But there was a situation that I was in, and I'll really never forget it. I was writing for the Globe and Mail at the time, and I was there just sort of speaking to people regularly, as you do as a journalist. And there was sort of this march that was of mostly men, actually, and they were approaching me from one direction of this neighborhood called Mohandasin, which is a part of Cairo, sort of an upper middle class area. And I don't know that I've actually really told this story totally before, so it's a little bit emotional for me, so I'm sorry about that. But I was there with my colleague Patrick Martin from the Globe, and I was the only woman there on the street. I was obviously a journalist, obviously asking questions of really just, everyday Egyptians. The people who were marching towards me were Hosni Mubarak supporters, and they were very angry at what was happening with pressure, I think, growing from, Egyptians for him to step down, with journalists from, from the West coming and covering what was happening with the revolution. And, they came up to me suddenly, and all of a sudden I was completely surrounded by these men who were, grabbing me and pushing me, grabbing my notebook, grabbing my pen, pulling Patrick Martin, my colleague, away from me. I felt totally alone, totally overwhelmed, and totally powerless. And it was an incredibly scary feeling. The only thing that saved me was a janitor, actually, at an apartment building, which was really adjacent to the street that we were on. He was someone who had 8 children at home. He lived in the basement of this building. He came upstairs, he opened the door, and it all happened so fast, I can barely, remember it, but I do remember that he came out with a gun, fired it in the air, and in that moment of silence, Patrick and I were able to get into the building. He pulled us inside and he took us into his apartment, where we were able to, find shelter and safety from that crowd outside that was really sort of chanting for us to come out and face them. It was an incredibly dangerous situation, and this janitor, I'll never forget him because he really put his life on the line for us. We were able to get out of that situation because we went out through his back door, through these back alleyways, and then back to our hotel. And that night, I was so shaken, and your adrenaline is going, so you're not aware of what's just happened to you. And Patrick and I had a bottle of wine, frankly. It's a steak dinner, and that night, I was getting ready for bed, and my whole body was covered in bruises that I hadn't felt at the time, but were there and lasted, a few days until they healed. I'm telling this story because I think that I was able to sort of get away from that very scary situation, that very scary crowd. I look at my colleagues right now who are the topic and the subject and the target of online hate, and I feel that they don't have that safety anywhere. I feel like every day in my job right now as editor-in-chief of Global News, I see incredibly violent messages come through our email filter systems that are forwarded to me by Rachel, by others, every day, that are just as damaging and I think just as wounding as what I experienced at that time. I think about that experience that I had when I talked to Rachel about what she's going through. Because I can really, I think, relate to her sense of anxiety, I think her sense of fear, and the relentlessness of what our journalists are experiencing. I think it's just as serious. I think it's perhaps even more insidious and in some ways more difficult to deal with, because the online hate that our journalists are experiencing is anonymous. There is no, crowd walking towards you. The crowd is everywhere. There's no actual face. There's no name. You don't know who actually you're up against. And oftentimes there's no janitor who's willing to sort of leave his apartment, run out into the street, and grab you and pull you to safety, because there is no safety. So that's the parallel that I see right now. And coming back to Canada 2 years ago and into this job, I was absolutely shocked at the change, I suppose, the change of social media. When I was a journalist in the field, and in fact, during the Arab Spring, social media was so interesting because it was actually an instrument of the revolution. So people in Tunisia were speaking to people in Egypt, were speaking to people in Libya, all through social media. A lot of people called it the social media revolution, or the Facebook revolution, actually. I used to give talks on that, in fact. And it was, in some ways, a really sort of positive tool of ways for people to connect, ways for journalists like myself to connect with sources, to find out what was going on. And now some of those platforms have just totally transformed. They've become incredibly toxic places. They've become places that I think breed hate, where there's no accountability. And you know, I think that it's something that we as a news organization were really looking at in terms of this idea of should our journalists be on social media? You know, there was a time where I think every journalist sort of felt the need that they had to be. This experience that I think we've been seeing across our newsrooms has led us, at least at Global News, to question that. So we've decided to basically tell our journalists, you know, there is absolutely no obligation for you to be on these platforms anymore. You know, your job is to tell stories, is to hold power to account, and is to really, you know, focus on your work. Social media has become something different than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So that's something that felt a little bit lonely to do, frankly, at first when we made this decision. But we were really concerned about the mental health of our journalists and about the diminishing return, frankly, of us being on some of these platforms. So we do have a social media team. The social media team socials our stories. That means that, you know, Rachel doesn't have to do that herself. You know, she doesn't have to put herself out there in a way that in a way where she's not able to sometimes control what she's, you know, getting back. Now, all that said, it still happens. Of course, it does, and I think that, you know, it's a terrible feeling when you feel, again, a little bit powerless against some of these attacks. So we've done everything from hiring a dedicated security person to sort of analyze some of the threats that come in. We've introduced email filtering systems across our newsrooms so that if there's certain words that come across in an email, you know, those messages, you know, words that are profane or that indicate that it's some sort of attack against our journalists, those emails, you know, they come to me, they don't go to our journalists because we don't want to have to expose them to those things. You know, we are part of these lobbying efforts that Catherine referred to, where we're speaking with law enforcement agencies across the country to try to ask for a more coordinated approach to, I think, responding to some of the attacks that are happening. And also, we're speaking to politicians, and the minister was actually one of the first, I will say, to meet with us after we wrote a joint letter to Prime Minister Trudeau and others last August to try and bring some attention to this, to what is happening. I think that at the end of the day, I don't have the answers of how to address this. I worry all the time that we're not doing enough. I try my very best, and all of our news leaders do at Global News, to support our journalists and to really try to protect them from some of this stuff. But if I'm to be 100% honest, we're not able to. We're not in a position to protect our journalists from this hate. And that's why I think the conversation has to be a bigger conversation. It has to be something that's talked about at a policy level, at a law enforcement level. You know, we don't have the tools to actually, you know, go after these people. And you know, it's not necessarily one person. You know, these are networks. Oftentimes, they're not even real people. It's well-funded, it's sophisticated, it's organized, and it's frankly terrifying. It's getting worse and worse. And one of the things that I'm seeing in my newsroom, and this is the thing that really devastates me, is people leaving the business. People deciding that, you know what, I don't need this, you know, and that's not only a problem for me, or not only a problem for journalism, but frankly, it's a problem for our democracy. Because this isn't just an attack on people. It's not just an attack on some of the very brave journalists we have on this panel. It's an attack on all of us. And that's why it matters. This conversation matters. It matters that we try to find solutions. It matters that we press our politicians and our law enforcement agencies to come up with real solutions that address the problem that's out there. I'm going to leave it there because I do want to leave time, obviously, for the panelists who are actually living through the experience right now, and also to answer any questions that you may have. But thanks for the time.
I don't know if this is working yet. Is it working yet? Thank you for that. That is really great. And we do want to get to your experience because I think that's firsthand. But when did you notice the shift? Because I remember when social media was a happier place as well. So, and I want to ask the journalists that, when did this shift happen? Did it happen slowly? Is it an event? When did you notice it?
I think I noticed it over time. And I think that, one of the things that I find interesting is as a news organization, and publishers, news publishers, credible news organizations, as you all know, we're governed by, principles. We have something at Global News called the JP&P, right? So that sort of governs the fact that, our news is unbiased, it's fact-based. There's accountability there that we have to ourselves, there's accountability to our audiences. With some of the social media platforms, those same obligations simply aren't there. There are some, internal guidelines, and I'm happy to hear that in some cases, you've made some headway with conversations with some of Facebook and Twitter. We've been very frustrated, quite honestly, and I think that there are gaps there in terms of accountability and of some of these platforms actually enforcing their own rules. And so that's just not happening. I don't know that there was sort of a switch that flicked. I think that it's a space that evolved over time, and I think that unless there's some real change to the rules governing some of these platforms, I can't see it actually going back. I see it getting worse and worse, and again, I think that there are forces that are very sophisticated, very well funded, that we're only, I think, just beginning to understand. And someone was speaking about this, I think, sometimes naivete in this country, that it's not here. But I think that we can say over the last year or so that it certainly is, and it's very much a real thing. So I don't know that there was sort of one event. I'm not sure if you.
Well, I think there was one event specifically with Facebook. We know if you had the, I see some people who were at the Frances Haugen event, the woman who was or is the whistleblower for Facebook, from Facebook. Mm-hmm. She did she appeared in at the Heritage Committee for C11 or C18 rather, and she talked very, very persuasively about the moment when Facebook made a decision to amplify hate and hate content on the platform, that the algorithms started, that there was a commercial reason for amplifying hate. And whereas to your point, whereas with the Arab Spring and the revolution, there was that moment of where social media was sort of unlocking democracy in a way and democratic voices. When they figured out, they made the connection between hate and commercial return, which is more clicks, because there's more hate, there's more clicks. That's what happened. So I would say, and I think she made that point, it's probably in the last 5 years, that very focused effort on amplifying hate happened in the social media sphere.
So I want to ask you both another question here, because I see it here. We have a question right here. So what solutions for preventing and addressing online harms can you guys envision as news leaders beyond policing?
Well, do you want to start?
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a bunch of things. To Sonia's point, we have these filter systems for the incoming emails, and we're just a lot smarter about You know, there used to be a comment section on CBC website where people could correct typos or make comments about our content, and all sorts of vile stuff was coming in through that door, so we closed that door. And, you know, and it's like a little whack-a-mole, but we're constantly looking. We've put some resources against security. So we now have people who are, like Dave Seglins, who are working on helping our journalists through the process when they're attacked, providing mental health support. But at the end of the day, that's why I talked about societal shift. Unless we, as a society, all stand up and say it's not acceptable, and I keep talking about drunk driving, but the reality is there was a time where nobody questioned that it was okay or not okay to drink. Everybody drank and drove. There was no question about it. And then it became unacceptable because people were killed and died. And we don't want our journalists to be killed and to be under this level of violence. So there needs to be that societal shift. So to me, it's a combination, education, keeping talking about it. Yes, on the technical side, there are things we can do to try to stop the flood. I talked a little earlier, we work with BBC and a whole bunch of news organizations on something called the Trusted News Initiative, which is around disinformation. Like we have an alert system around the globe when disinformation, especially disinformation that hits a threshold on violence, we alert each other. So that's in place. And then we went a step further and said, now we need artificial intelligence to figure out, okay, every single day, and I'm sure this is the same for the other news organizations, there are, I don't know, dozens of fake CBC or Radio-Canada postings, just fake. And so artificial intelligence to track that down and take it down. You know, again, it's whack-a-mole, Joyce.
I think it's also about setting our own boundaries and making our own choices as news organizations and as journalists. And that was really sort of the basis by which we decided at Global News to tell our journalists, listen, you are not obliged to play in this sandbox anymore.
Did they take you up on that? How many have decided?
I've noticed a real shift.
Okay.
I've noticed a real shift. And I think that it's something that I've noticed really in the last year or two. We have social media forums. Rachel and I actually spoke at the most recent one at Global News, where it's just a group of journalists talking fairly informally about what they're facing, what they're feeling, what they're experiencing. And that's a really important thing as well. But I think, yeah, sure.
How does that work for your freelance journalist? Because if you're freelance, you have to be on social media. And this idea that people can just be off social media is, I'm sorry, it's for people who don't understand media as it is. You can't be off social media. Sure, if you are already established and you are of that class, and when I say class, it means that you are salaried, it means that you're employed, it means that you get to go on CBC's At Issue every week. They're the ones who don't have to be on social. We do. And this idea that we can make this choice to just step away from the noise is ludicrous. It does not reflect an intersectional look at media today. And I wish this panel were more intersectional, I will say, because this intersects with, you can't compare identity to drunk driving. I'm sorry. You cannot compare people's existence as who they are and who they want to be to drunk driving. It's a whole different situation that we have here. And media has been part of the problem in building our vulnerability.
How so?
Well, I just talked to you about freelancing. How many more media organizations are depending on freelancers now to build their content? How much protection do you think those freelancers have? They have no institutional protection. So yes, they have to be on social media to be able to get the next freelancing contract. And boom, 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 that's what we have to do. So I really do think that there needs to be, and the people who are most likely to be freelancers are racialized, they're LGBTQ, they are trans, they are not being picked up by this promise of diversity of voices.
Do you have a response to that?
Well, I can.
How do you, but actually, you make a good point about freelancers. How do you protect, or how do you protect your freelancers? And can you even?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues that are layered into that. Like you kind of start to unpack it in terms
Hence
of
the intersectionality.
Yeah. No, we have,
Yes.
and absolutely, the conversation around how do we evolve our newsrooms to be truly inclusive and, truly reflective of the society we're trying to serve. That's a whole other topic.
No, but it's not a whole other topic. This is my point, is that these things are interspersed with each other. They are connected. And what Canadian media has done is it's built a structure where there's it's the Hunger Games, right? We didn't build that structure. We're just reacting to it. And then you're telling us that, oh, well, we can be off social media. We cannot. That's not realistic. So I just want to be realistic and speak for people who are not in that space of being employed. Having benefits for mental health is another issue. Not even knowing if they do, and basically have rollover extensive contracts. Because those people are most likely to be racialized, most likely to be queer, disabled, trans, etc. And most likely to be women.
That too. Hold that thought, because I think there's a question from the floor, I believe. I want to give people a chance. We will get to that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you all for being here. I guess I'm increasingly skeptical of the term racialized journalist because it's never a monolith. Our experiences are never going to be the same. And what happens is, one of the ways in which it manifests is that an increasing number of journalists who work in Canada, and many of them do happen to be freelancers, in fact, they are journalists who work in Canada but were not born in Canada, and therefore bring a lot of baggage, emotional or otherwise, from their countries of origin. And often what happens when there's a slew of online hate or threat or abuse is that while they are processing everything, they also have the added burden of explaining to their institutions why that threat is a threat, because so you have to do history 101, culture 101, sociology 101, while you're also going through a very emotional process of dealing with something very personal and very harming to you. I'm wondering how that conversation with an institution, if you are A, employed, or B, if you're freelancing for an organization, how can that process or that conversation be easier when you're already dealing with a lot at that moment? And it's a hyper-emotional moment.
Can I just say, you're absolutely correct. And even me, who was born in this country, have to explain why something's misogynist, why something is racist, to upper management, because we need their buy-in to do something and to take it seriously, right? So we have to do the cultural training, even being from here, so I totally hear what you're saying.
You feel that management isn't buying in? Do you feel that management doesn't believe in online hate, that you
They
are
don't know what the hate is. I
can't agree with saying that we don't know what it is. That's not fair.
No.
Erica.
What I'm saying is, we still have to explain to them what racism is. We still have to explain to them that this is actually misogynoir. How many of you have used that term even, misogynoir? And those kinds of things are things that we have to explain before we get that buy-in. And that is, as he's saying, an added burden. It's an added trauma.
If I might, I think that you're making a really interesting point. I think in my career I've spent time in all sorts of different countries. My own father was born in India, immigrated here in 1967, and I was born and grew up here, but have had amazing opportunities to travel all over. And one of the things that I think strikes me with the online hate is that I think in some of the places that I've visited and some of the places where our journalists are from, online hate is a step towards actual real violence. Can be actually, it's not something that's isolated to the virtual world. There's instances, and this is, this happens, I think, the fear is that this can happen here as well, where threats that are made online anonymously become actual, real, physical threats to people. And I think that we felt that most acutely, I think, during some of the so-called Freedom Convoy protests, where we had to really assess what we were receiving, again, online, and have that factor into some of our security discussions. But I think that as our newsrooms do become more diverse, and I think that as our leadership does become more diverse, I think that only adds to our understanding of, I think, how dangerous what we're talking about really is.
It's a journey we're all on, and it is a journey, and I recognize, and Saba, by the way, one of the person on Zoom has that experience. But if I can just say one thing about because I don't want to leave the freelance journalist unspoken to, because many of you may end up in that situation where you are freelance before you get that permanent job. First of all, within CBC Radio-Canada, our commitment is that benefits do go to our contract employees. So there's that. That's not the case for all journalists. Erica is absolutely right. There is a higher proportion of diverse journalists in what I would call the vulnerable tranche of the industry. That has to change. We are committed to bringing that, to shifting that. And for sure, it should happen right now. I'm the first woman in 80 years to run the CBC Radio-Canada. It took 80 years. We can't wait 80 years to have you be in my job. You know what I'm saying? Nice. No, seriously. You'd be too old for it.
I'm not making an offer, are you?
But that's the reality. That's the change we need to see.
Okay, we need to hear from our journalists here. We want to hear from Saba. So I think
And you're not going to get your stretch break. I'm just going to move the podium so that the panel can continue up here.
So I think what we need to hear from our journalists here, and maybe we'll start with Saba, who's far away, is try to explain to the people who are following us online, Saba, and those who are here, what concrete examples can you give, how you've lived it, what people are writing to you, so that, and I don't think these are things that should be sugar-coated. So, go ahead, explain to the public here, what are we talking about when we talk about the online hate, the threats, and the kind of vocabulary that is used out there. Okay, we've got an audio.
You're muted.
You're muted?
Most famous words during the
I muted myself. Can you hear me? Well, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm really sorry I killed your stretch break. Really great to be in an event with such amazing veteran journalists and upcoming journalists. And hello, Erica and Rachel and Minister Mendocino. It's good to see you. I had opening remarks prepared, but I just quickly wanted to add a little to this conversation that's just taken place before us, that I think that we are beyond the movement where we're beyond the moment when we're talking about social media in this sort of siloized context. Social media violence is very much connected to real life violence. I know that Catherine brought up statistics from the latest UNESCO ICFJ report about how online harassment affects journalists. That same report also says that 1 in 5 of the women who were harassed, that online violence trickled down into real life, which it can be physical, it can be legal harassment, but it became, it comes into your real life. Also, frankly, there is that racialized context, and Erica brought up some really good points as well, but you can't really divest yourself from social media. You can't not be on social media. We're talking about an increasingly digitized world. It's a place which connects us to our communities, to our stories, to the rest of the world. It's really hard to not be able to operate without that aspect. And also, frankly, this recent conversation that's been propelled by the latest hate wave that all of us got, I wasn't on social media because I'd been dealing with so much trolling that I actually disengaged. And maybe the most I would do is like retweet my own podcast at some point. I got emails. So from encrypted emails, which is a great big part of this conversation. It's not just social media, disengaging from these platforms and giving up space that we have earned after a very, very difficult time. We are already underrepresented in the media landscape, in the general landscape as racialized people. Giving up space and disengaging from this will not disengage from the hate. The hate follows you until the systemic issues are addressed. So just wanted to add that before I actually want to get to my own points. Just my apologies in advance that, my state of mind right now is kind of what I read about in Chanel Miller's book, Know My Name, which talks about trauma brilliantly, which is my mind is one step behind where it used to be before I was living in real time. Now I evaluate the moment before I can move into it. So apologies for those lags. I did prepare some notes because my brain doesn't work that great these days. So I want to talk a little bit about myself because safe has now become an alien word to me. I can't remember what safe looks or feels like, which is ironic because safety is what I came to this country for. I left Pakistan after my reporting on human rights abuses and state complicity led to a horrific organized online hate campaign against me, just like it did here. I was doxxed, I was vilified, assaulted by misogynistic, ethnophobic, violent abuse, just like here. The police didn't believe me, they didn't help me, just like here. So when the violence spiraled over into real life, I had to leave everything that I know behind. So my question is, where do I go now when the place of refuge starts to resemble the place of escape? Me and my other colleagues, two of whom are here, at the worst end of this seemingly organized hate campaign have been exhausted now for more than a year since the first wave of this began, I believe, in the fall, just after Maxine Bernier's tweet doxing some journalists and pretty much issuing a call to play dirty with other journalists. Since then, there have been many other politicians, prominent figures, legitimizing this message, and we've seen more hate. So last year, I know that these conversations began late last year, but none of us had kind of even seen the support and the amplification we're seeing now. It took us a really long time to figure out that these attacks were potentially coordinated, that they had the same names, the same kind of graphic language and terminology. And to do that, a lot of us had to form our own community, our own support group, and our own investigative and advocacy team to demonstrate some of this. And I think that burden should not have been on us. I know of many, many others who are much more vulnerable, who are terrified, who don't have job security or social currency, who've gone silent, who have stopped reporting. They're self-censoring. And I do it every day myself because every time I tweet, even just like a small casual tweet talking about like a thing in my day, it's like taking a leap off a cliff because you don't know how it's going to be received. I can't even post my work without having to think about what repercussions I'm going to be dealing with. So when journalists start thinking twice about saying something, about doing their jobs, and weighing the risks of what they do for the public against their very own personal safety, there's something very wrong with the picture. So we're constantly countered with police, why we didn't go to the police, what did the police say, report this to the police. And when we talk about this, it comes up. So we decided to answer this question once and for all. We sacrificed our personal lives, our sanity, our income generating working hours to try and get help from the police. And we all found ourselves facing dead ends. It was also a good reminder for when you're asking racialized women to report, you're basically asking them to fight outdated structures that were designed to keep them down rather than to keep up with the new dangers of this digital hate. It took more than a year of terrible threats, abuse, a letter signed by 48 newsrooms and journalistic bodies, support from government stakeholders like Minister Mendocino, like Prime Minister Trudeau and others, for me just to get a call back from a detective. There is a global movement which is going on as we speak to silence the most vulnerable journalists, often women of color, minorities. The purpose is to shrink their access to digital spaces, which also shrinks their access to public spaces, and therefore their ability to do their jobs, impart and access information, and to use these mediums for their socio-political expression. And this is now, I'm not going to say it started happening in Canada because it was always happening in Canada, but it started amplifying, it started escalating here. And that's a danger to democracy that cannot and should not be ignored. The stories that we are telling about our country, our communities, about each other, they matter. So what happens when these crucial storytellers are silenced and they're pushed out of public spaces? Who will take over the information vacuums that are left behind? So I'm just going to say at the end that I feel like we have become like broken records. We are invited to platforms. We are asked to share our story. When we do that, we get attacked for it even more on social media. It's happening. The two guests that my colleagues, Erica and Rachel, the reason they're late is because they were dealing with security backlash and security threats because they were a part of this panel. We are called names, told by privileged white people what our experience should be, how we should feel about it, and then we're lambasted for talking about it. We're told we're doing it for attention or clout. So let me read to you one of the emails I apparently invited upon myself to gain attention. And I'm just going to offer a trigger warning here that this is going to get graphic and offensive. When a chimp-faced sand N-word pocky cunt like you is dragged out to the end zone, a stadium of white men in purple cheer as you're draped in a shit brown burqa, and the loudspeaker announces, Sabah Itazaz, guilty of treason, sabotage, not learning to shut her brown fucking cunt-shaped mouth when she was told, guilty. When the AR-15 rammed into the back of your head pops, and you, already kneeling, topple over, maybe the last thing you hear is thousands of white, civilized Canadian males roar at the justice served. Thank you.
I want to ask about these support group. Are you part of that support group?
I created it.
So how does it work?
Support?
Because, well, I know that Rachel has spoken about the fact that the police, you go to the police, what happens? Please tell the people what is it that the police minister is listening. What does the police do when you tell them you are getting an email or a tweet or whatever it is like that one?
Well, I mean, we reported these emails.
Yes.
And, you know, each of us had targeted threats within them. And we were told that these did not constitute a threat under the criminal code. So what you just heard wasn't a threat. That's clearly an issue in the laws. And then they started pursuing it as a hate speech issue, which is slow and difficult, much like most law enforcement. And they also started telling us to report these emails separately as we get more and more. So every single time somebody took the time to write a death threat to me, I'd have to take time out of my day to report it to the police. And it's a huge pain in the ass. And it's very frustrating because then people will ask you, oh, did you report this? Oh, did you report this? And you don't have 2 hours every day to sit on hold to be told that something's not a threat. And, you know, I have this one email I got, or video, sorry, where someone was pulling out a knife and threatening me. And I reported that one. And I reported it, I wasn't initially going to, but multiple people, especially like white male journalists, DM me because they saw the video and they said, you need to report this to the police. This is a threat. I got an email from the police last week telling me it wasn't a threat under the criminal code. So that's what happens when we go to the police.
Wait, you had a knife incident too?
Oh, did you get one?
Yeah. Oh, shit.
He's
We
over
need to
that.
talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how does the support group, explain it to me then, Erica, how does the support group work? If you're not getting any help from the police, and I'm going to ask you, Minister, after that, if you're not getting help from the police, if you are freelancers, but you at least are getting the support of your organization, do you feel your organization doesn't support you, Erica?
Right now, no.
Why?
This is a long story, but let's just say.
Is it that they don't believe you?
I wouldn't say that they don't believe me. I think they recognize some threats and not others. I think what I experience, what we experience, is a continuation of threats that have come from work that we've done on far right and the rise of the far right. And the fact that we've gotten into how many minutes, almost an hour into this, and we haven't talked about the far right, is like a huge problem, because that is the context within which this is happening, right? These are all either convoy people or convoy adjacent people or white supremacists or something like that. And the fact that we haven't characterized it as that kind of tells me that we have a long way to go to getting people in positions of power to really understanding what is going on.
Minister, do you understand what's going on?
I certainly have I think, a very much more sober appreciation and of the experiences that you're going through every day. And I think I can't do anything except start by expressing the gratitude for the candor and the bravery that you show every day. I mean, having had to crash through barriers to crack into your profession, and then to then have to be inundated day in and day out with intimidation, harassment, overt racism, obviously criminal conduct, and the fact that you still go out there and write stories, which is for the benefit of all Canadians, is, I think, a real testament to each and every one of you. And so I would just begin by saying that. Thank you for what you do. It is important that we call it for what it is, Erica. And it is racist. It is misogynistic. Mm-hmm. It is criminal. It is against the law. And it is intentional, that it targets disproportionately women, racialized, Indigenous, and other minority communities. I think there is no doubt in my mind that the goal is to crowd you all out, and to preserve or restore some delusional sense of what the status quo was like. And, from where I sit, and one of the main reasons why I took the call is that, one, I feel it is government's responsibility to have a role in this, including the elected government being a bridge to law enforcement, who we trust to do the job, independent of the elected government, to keep all spaces safe, including online space. And, I think, Sonia, your metaphor at the beginning of describing how you felt in Tahrir Square when you were assaulted, and you didn't even realize it because of the trauma in the moment, was very apt. And what we are seeing online is every day at Tahrir Square, where nobody is safe. And the trauma that causes to professionals, journalists who have who are trying to fulfill a democratically essential responsibility to tell stories from perspectives that have not historically been told. And so from where I sit, Joyce, and then I'll pass it back to you to keep the conversation going, I do think that obviously police need to turn their minds very conscientiously to the systemic barriers that have contributed to underreporting from women, from racialized individuals, to reflect on why there is an absence of trust, and to build that trust so that there can be some confidence that when somebody picks up the phone and reports an incident, that it will be treated with dignity and with respect and with professionalism and with accountability for crimes that have been committed, and to work with social media, who also have a responsibility to uphold the terms and the conditions by which we all agree to participate in their virtual town squares, which doesn't happen. And this is a source of great frustration, I think, for all of us. I mean, I've written in the wake of the complaints that you've all put to me, to Twitter and to other platforms, you know, let's do something about this. And I feel like at times it's like pulling teeth, and it should not be that hard. And I think that that is equally true in the law enforcement space, and that is why I think we have to keep having a conversation about how we can have a protocol with transparency that builds trust so that we can have online spaces which are safe.
So, Saba, let me ask you this. Erica was saying we haven't talked about where these threats are coming from. Do you know where the ones that you get are coming from? Do you know who or what you are dealing with?
I mean, like Erica said, you know, there's certain narratives that cannot be ignored when we talk about this. The reason we got together was to establish the terminology and the common language that is used very openly, in fact, live streamed on YouTube channels and in Telegram channels by far-right groups like Diagolon. That kind of terminology and similar words have been used in those emails. We can't say who is behind the emails because they're encrypted emails, and that's why we're here today to debate about, you know, what the law enforcement needs to do to build that capacity, and what needs to be done to work with other stakeholders to, you know, when there's death threats and rape threats being issued through encrypted emails. But we can talk about timing. We can talk about how we were being digitally surveilled while this whole thing was happening, how when I first tweeted about one of these emails, I decided to go public and posted it on social media. One of the first tweets, like within seconds, as if the individual was already there, was from a very well-known leader of a far-right group, Diagolon, warning me about my actions. There were other surveillance tactics going on. Anybody who tweeted in support of us on social media immediately within minutes would see like a hate email of their own, which also cross-referenced us, but then additionally added threats against them. So this is a very organized and seemingly organized and systemic effort. So who is organizing and systematically doing these things in Canada is what we need to look at. We need to look at the kinds of messaging and the timing that aligns with that messaging. You know, there's Jeremy McKenzie from Diagolon, who talks about Rachel Gilmore, and a lot of journalists frequently on his live streams. He has talked about journalists should throw themselves off a roof or something, or they should be burned as babies. He has legitimized violence language. He directs a lot of the vitriol towards Rachel and other colleagues. And we do see a rise in the kinds of emails and the kind of hate we get within I would say hours or minutes of that. So we have to talk about what parties are legitimizing this kind of violence. It's not about one person just typing away in a basement, you know, sending us, like we said, this is not an isolated problem. So that's what Erica means when she talks about, like, let's talk about the organized far-right movement and whether that has a role in this.
So, Minister, let me ask you that. What Rachel received seemed and sounds, I don't know if it sounds that way to you people here, but it felt like a death threat. So why don't police recognize that? And what can you do? What kind of legislation, if that doesn't meet the definition of the criminal code, what does?
I think there are two questions that arise out of Rachel's example, and it's obviously very disconcerting, and I've seen some of the posts, and not just from you, Rachel, from you, Erica, as well. And again, I mean, I go back to the very raw conversations that we had last summer, which then caused me to reach out to law enforcement to really engage and understand, like, what are the protocols, what are the professional standards by which police are dealing with the specific category of journalists who have this constitutionally important.
They are getting increased
Because
complaints.
there is no doubt about that. And I think that we've seen the pandemic exacerbate the problem as we all had to retreat and, socially distance, et cetera, and use social media to do more of our work. And that has become a hive for all of this vile, toxic, illegal, racist, misogynistic content. And I think that I think in my capacity as the Minister of Public Safety, what I'm looking for is objective clarity about how police make decisions about what is clearly criminal, where there are reasonable grounds to believe on the basis of what they are reading and seeing, and how they are responding to that in a way that will ensure that there is accountability. So that is precisely, I think, the space that we have to be in, because I think Rachel's example raises some very serious questions about how those standards are being applied. I think the other thing I would say is that it is also important to remember that social media have a critically important role to report where those incidents occur and to preserve evidence so that, again, on the decision of police, which are undertaken independently, those individuals can be brought to justice. And I think that's part of, the overarching conversation is how do we create a safe space, a safe digital town hall? And you can't have a safe digital town hall or a public square if it is impossible to enforce the law. And in the face of these, I think, egregious examples, we're going to have to figure out exactly where those standards are and make sure that they're enforced in a way that is coherent and that makes sense.
Rachel, I know you want to say.
I did just want to say, maybe because I'm annoying or maybe just because I'm a journalist, maybe a little both. When I was on the phone with the police, I would ask them, I'd be like, why isn't this against the law? What are you struggling with here? Because to me, this really feels like a threat. And they would say to me, they have to be explicit. They have to tell you, I am going to stab you in the heart and kill you. So if they say, oh, wouldn't it be a shame if somebody stabbed you in the heart and killed you? That is suddenly not violating the criminal code, as the law enforcement officers told me that they were interpreting it. And I think that gray area is where a lot of these individuals like to play, because I think they know the law very well, because a lot of these guys brush up against it on a pretty regular basis. And there's
also law enforcement that's also kind of inculcated in some of these things, right? And I think that's the piece we're not really we're kind of skirting around. How can we trust law enforcement when they're implicated, as we've seen with the public inquiry, the commission on the convoy, right? This is the way I dealt with it. I have a friend who used to be, he's the only cop I recognize because he's an ex-cop. And he told me, he said, Erica, they have an online portal to do this. You don't have to mess with them. And I was like, really? So I went online, and the funny thing is, you cannot report online threats online to the police. Like, that is where we are in terms of their sort of response and the sophistication of their response. They're very unsophisticated too. And it's like I was telling you, why don't we have more coordination and like a central spot, either in CSIS or CRE, I can't remember which one's domestic, where they can actually map out these ecosystems. Why don't we have that kind of coordination? Why don't we have that structure? And, if I am telling them this, and I sure as hell don't get $1 billion in like appropriations a year, I'm wondering, I'm just like, shoot, pay me $1 billion, I could sew this structure up, but we don't have that sophistication. We really don't. Sorry.
Rachel, finish your thought, and then I want to go to the questions here on the floor. But
yeah, no, I think that was pretty much it. Was just, I think that the language in the criminal code is being interpreted in this way by police officers. And maybe, I don't know if that is a problem with the officers or a problem with the language in the criminal code, but maybe that's a little something to think about, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's an area where maybe some
Or
of this
maybe a
could be
little bit of
changed.
awareness could help as well,
Yeah,
right?
like I shouldn't have to explain to a cop what a quote tweet is when I'm reporting an online threat. You know?
I want to
Lord,
get
yes.
a question here because you've been so patient. Go ahead.
You're talking about exactly, I don't know how to put this. You're talking about exactly what I wanted to bring up, which Erica brought up at the far right, and these are convoy people. And I was an active counter-protester against the convoy up until now. And I'm here
Thank
because,
you.
you're welcome. And I'm here because
that
I
takes
know.
a lot of bravery.
I know about
Yeah.
the threats
Yeah.
to Erica, to Rachel, which is why I'm here. But what I wanted to, so we learned during the commission of the separation or orders of policing. And so, so you're finding a brick wall when you're going to the local police.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we can all see that this is Saba and everybody else is going through. This is criminal, and unfortunately, you're not getting anywhere. And you've answered a lot of my questions, so I'm just going to make a statement and ask this question. The commission didn't bring up, and I was there downtown during January and February and witnessed journalists getting harassed, getting pushed around. I had a journalist come and protect me at one point. And the commission didn't really talk about journalists and what they went through during the convoy, which is an extremely important piece because you were bringing us the stories if you people weren't like me and physically downtown putting themselves in there like you were. So is it too late for all of you to come together, because now they're talking about recommendations and those sort of things? Is it too late maybe or not? Can you put together something to provide to the commission so that this becomes part of the report? Because I think it's fundamental, like you said, to our democracy.
The Ottawa People's Commission,
Yes.
they did quite a good, extensive job at capturing a lot of what the residents and the reporters went through. I agree with you. I think that is that's a huge oversight by the Public Commission. It would definitely aid in letting people understand what we actually do and the risks that we do take, and that is part of the story. What I find just in journalism in general in this country is that it's very siloed. Yes, your diversity policies have exactly to do with what's happening to us. They do. The fact that your lack of diversity of voices are exactly play into all of this, because it sets up the structure, and it sets up the perception of A, who is a reporter, B, who is a victim in a story, who is the perpetrator, who are experts. Till this day, I make it a point not to, when I'm doing a story or when I'm seeking experts, I do not seek white men, because I want to change what expertise looks like on television and in my stories, because that's my job. My job is not to placate power, it's to challenge power, right? And it is, for me, my job is to center marginalized people who do not get a voice, right? Because I'm sorry, in traditional structures, we didn't have a voice. And many times we don't have a voice now. I can give you an example. Let's look at the Queen coverage, for example. When the Queen died on CBC, they interviewed her glove maker, but I didn't see many voices that wrote like I did, who said, well, I'm glad the Queen is dead. And let me tell you why. Because there are many of us who come from colonialist backgrounds who are sitting there being like, oh God, do we have to do this again? Where is this diversity of voices that we were promised 2 years ago after George Floyd? I don't see it. I see a lot of those people you put in harm's way with contracts and rolling contracts and never making them permanent. A lot of institutions don't want to back up somebody who is too loud, which is another issue with how media treats us. So media treats Black women very poorly. I can tell you that some of the pushback and some of the worst things I've heard about our situation are from colleagues, white male colleagues, white female colleagues, who we again have to prove that this is misogyny, this is racism, this is X, this is Y. So there is something wrong with the media, culture, you know, where we have to battle colleagues like we battle, these nationalists.
But let me go to the because I really want to get you guys to ask your question. So please, I don't know which one of you was there first, but go ahead, ask your question.
Okay, I would put this out to the whole panel, as I believe it applies from news articles to government legislation and press releases. But to the points made about self-censorship and cracking down with social media guidelines, what would you guys say is the role of content originators in the discourse that follows, and in sort of walking that line between protecting people and protecting journalists, but also avoiding censorship?
I think that's.
Are you talking about meme culture and stuff?
Just the discourse that surrounds. I know CBC made the choice to eliminate some comment sections to sort of take on the kind of discourse that follows, and so I would throw that question out with the responsibility of the content originators for articles or government press releases with what happens next.
Well, Saba, would you like to take that one on?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question. Who do
Can
you
you
mean by
explain? Yeah,
content
I think-
originators?
People who put out content, whether it be politicians putting forth press releases or legislation bills, or journalists who put forward articles, and the discourse that comes from that from the public, and the role and the responsibility that these people have for that.
So you mean
Like
moderating their own
replies?
replies
Yeah.
on Twitter
Yeah.
and
Comments,
things
yeah.
like that?
Right. I mean, I don't think that, the content that journalists or political figures put forward are responsible for, the hate or death threats that come as a result of that. Is that what you're talking about? I'm sorry, I'm just still like.
Yeah, go back to the mic.
Erica or Rachel or anybody who wants to take this.
I'm trying to dig down here. When you talk about the content creators, you're talking about the people who post the original content, right? So
Like the journalists.
You're not talking about commenters. You're talking about the original content creators, right? Okay, and what responsibility we have in shaping the conversation?
Yeah.
So, Saba, what responsibility? I mean, I think it goes sideways pretty fast.
Yeah, I think that our responsibility is the job that we do,
Yes.
which is provide information, help disseminate it. There is a difference between, I don't believe in both sidesism, especially in issues where, there's a racialized context, there's other nuance that's needed. We are here responsible for our jobs, which is in the public interest, to provide information and the facts to help disseminate them. I think that if somebody misconstrues that and uses that to give us death or rape or hate threats, or is, a lot of the criticism that I see on my work, on my journalism, it's never been about the work. They never say anything. They always talk about the color of my skin. They talk about either leaving the country or leaving journalism, but they don't really tell me what the problem is. Usually when you try to engage them, there's just more hatred and vitriol that comes your way. You ask them if there is any critical thing that they have to add. They don't provide much logic except to say that we're making up things. I think that, the fake news narrative that happened in a post-Trumpian world has done a lot of damage to the credibility of journalism as an institution, and has created a lot of dangers for journalists, because it's just such a convenient terminology to use when you don't like the truth, or when you don't like looking into the mirror, you can just like, it's an umbrella term. I've seen dictators, I've seen populist leaders use it to manipulate reality and to blur the line. So I think my responsibility is what I'm already doing. I think the content originator, if by that it's journalistic organizations, their responsibility is to report responsibly, to do their fact checking, to have their source verifications in place, to when we have all of that and we do that systematically. And if we don't, we're answerable to our editorial leadership. There's no great conspiracy happening, which is often portrayed. So what we face comes from a lot of disinformation, a lot of conspiracy theories. There is never any evidence behind it, and that also kind of turns around to like social media and the state that it's in right now, where there's so many sources of disinformation that are there to confuse the narrative and to conflate the truth. I hope that's an answer.
And maybe
I'd add that it's an interesting point, I think, that you raise around the conversation or the comments that follow the publication of a particular piece. And that's something that we've been looking at a little bit internally, because there's certain topics, frankly, that will be covered on our website, for example, and then the comments that fill up afterwards are that along the lines of they're abusive. They're not actually contributing to a conversation, and so we will shut down those comments, and that feels not great on one level, but at the end of the day, it's not a conversation that's happening there. It's abuse that's happening. And so, for us as editors or news leaders or publishers, like we have that responsibility, I think, to do that. But I would say that, again, these social media platforms don't do the same thing oftentimes. So that's a real difference. And so, we take responsibility for the content that appears on our site. And if it becomes toxic, I have no problem shutting that down, really.
and the CBC too. I want to get to your question because I
but,
know.
But I think, just
Go ahead.
give me a second. I think I'm a columnist, so I feel like I kind of get what you're getting at, because I write opinion, right? But I back my shit up. Okay, you will see quotes. You will see highlighted links to studies, to whatever. And to me, I provide all my evidence for what I'm saying. I expect people to be assholes. I don't expect them to be, I don't have to take their abuse. And even when I challenge people online, I challenge their work. I never take it personal. I never say whatever, but some people really need to know when, their work does not portray people who are marginalized in this country in a light that is constructive, right? And so, I'll push back, but I also have a right to push back, right? And I know that there are people probably in this room who are like, yeah, but you deserve it. You push back, you're loud, you're all of the things, and I would like to ask them if they know the definition of misogynoir, which is misogyny against black women. Because there's a caricature of women and how we must conduct ourselves in this country, submissively, especially submissive to a man, especially submissive to a white man. I know this already. That is the socio-economic context and structure of our society. So for me, I expect people to be assholes. I even expect them to say the N-word. I even expect them to call me a bitch. And I'm like, all right, but digital lynchings? No. Digital surveillance, and now we're getting into digital lynching space. Digital surveillance, all of that? No. No. There has to be a line drawn, or else we have no standards. And the thing is, we are the canaries in the coal mine. This is democracy we're talking about, right? At the end of the day, this is democracy. And it always comes for the ones who are most vulnerable first, because that's how they test out their tactics, because they know society doesn't care about us, right? So they will engage and expand, and they will level up. And then a year or two from now, I hope we're not talking about this over somebody's dead body.
Yeah.
And
I
that's the
just quickly
reality
wanted to
of what we're
add
talking
to-
about. Sorry,
Go
I keep
ahead.
looking at you. 'cause it's
Go
your
ahead,
question.
Sab.
Don't feel like
Go
it's
ahead,
all
Just
right.
as
Saba.
an example, it just occurred to me because you're talking about, content originators and their responsibilities. I remember that there was an article for The Star that one of our reporters did, and it talked about, people who are anti-vaccination, and then it just kind of brought together opinions from different medical experts talking about whether that's dangerous, what's the scientific data behind it. Now, somebody did a page design of in such a way where, it was a design choice, and it's been clarified since, it's been taken back since, but all of the things that those medical experts and people who were talking about vaxxers was put up, like the quotes were put up as a design choice. And that journalist, the story was taken completely out of context. That was journalist as a racialized journalist. She was bombarded for weeks with hate, with vitriol, with the worst kind of abuse. All of the things that was, some page designers, choice, they were just like attributed to her, that she said all these things, that the Toronto Star is saying all these things. Nobody read the article. Nobody looked at the context. And to this day, that haunts us. The screenshot of that page design, that headline, is used every time I speak out about, the hate that I'm facing. Other colleagues, it's just used as some kind of proof that, this is what these guys are saying. So, I think it's important to see how that is used out of context, but it's also really important to, that's when we talk about representation in our newsrooms, when we talk about representation at senior levels, at every level, like whether it's editorial or otherwise, it helps to add that kind of nuance and to avoid certain mistakes that can be misconstrued or misused to further target the most vulnerable journalists at that organization. So there is that aspect of responsibility on our end as well.
I want to go to your question. You have been very patient.
No worries. I don't know if this is working. So I'm a journalism student, and as a student, we're taught to use these social media platforms as a huge kind of resource for us to share our stories, share our work, network with journalists, meet new people, find stories. And so I'm wondering, as journalists, is there a way that we can decrease our reliability on platforms like this? Like, platforms that have recently undergone ownership change, that have become a much more toxic
Without naming names.
Yeah. Has become very toxic, and there's been a compliant kind of nature towards these far-right comments, towards these hate comments. And so I'm wondering, do you foresee a future where we can decrease our reliability on platforms like this? Do you see that there's other ways that we can kind of network and share our work? What do you guys think?
Rachel, what do you think about that?
Well, I think one of the inherent issues with the work that we do in the modern context is that we are communicating. We're communicating the news with people, which means we have to find them where they are. And that makes it really difficult when the places where you can communicate best with the public are also the places where, you face this kind of abuse. And it's a really tough question. It really is, because I actually think that I don't know how we can get our work read. I mean, there are numbers that, you speak to. I was listening on a Twitter space the other day, and somebody who I think does social media for a major American publication said that actually only about 5% of their traffic comes from Twitter on the website, which I found really surprising, because as journalists, we're like constantly on Twitter. We're all about Twitter. But, I do think that one thing that I like to do when one platform becomes too toxic is I've been working on kind of diversifying where I communicate my work to the public. So, obviously the main place I do that is the website. But I want to get people on the website. So maybe I'll make a TikTok and explain parts of the story and say, hey, and frankly, TikTok is a far less toxic platform. Like in my experience, I have not gotten anywhere near the same level of abuse on that platform.
Their algo is fire.
And like the conversations that you have are actually really interesting, and then you can respond to people, and it's nice. It feels like I'm actually having, I can actually talk about the story itself instead of, you know, whether or not I like pumpkin spice lattes, which has been a frequent topic of conversation on Twitter. For the record, I don't like pumpkin spice. I'm really sorry to let people down with that, but I just have never been a fan.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I mean, without getting into numbers, but the figure that Rachel cited about the amount of traffic that comes from Twitter is not surprising to me whatsoever. Yeah. It's not as significant as I think would warrant our journalists putting themselves and their content out there. You know, if the goal is to actually bring attention back to our own platforms, our own sites, then Twitter actually is less and less effective in doing so, and has been for some time. I also think that in terms of some of Rachel's comments and what you were talking about as well as a journalism student, you know, I think there's a real lost art of conversation and of talking to real people and of picking up phones, cell phones even, of going out into a crowd and talking to people. And I think that that's something that, you know, perhaps again with the pandemic, of course, everyone was working in such an isolated way, but I think that, you know, that's something that we have to sort of look at again, right, is talking to actual people sometimes and trying to connect with people outside of the platforms that, you know, let's face it, sometimes you're not even sure that you're talking to an actual person. So, yeah.
Would you like to ask a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, just very brief. I mean, based on what I've heard, this isn't just an issue for journalists, right? It's anybody in the public eye. It's politicians. It's lawyers. Somebody in a religious group. So, digital hate is out there. That's not the issue we should be arguing about. My question is maybe to the minister, because it goes beyond journalism. It's the platforms, and people are talking to the platforms, and we have laws. I guess, would you ever consider having a central CSIS organized to actually take Erica's call? And they understand what the laws are. They're Canada-wide. They provided an effort. They put some money behind it so that we can get real traction. We can really understand what the issues are. And maybe that might be part of the answer.
Yeah, and look, I think it does actually come back to a bit to Erica's point about understanding what is the right apparatus to respond to this phenomenon that is so pervasively attacking many institutions. Tonight we're here to talk about the online harm that is posed to journalists, and that is a very real thing that is occurring on a daily basis, and it is having a direct impact on Canadians, on all of you, to get good, reliable news and facts. Most importantly, facts from different perspectives. And I think, you know, one of the key takeaways from tonight's conversation is not only how do we make sure that those protocols exist, so that if somebody picks up the phone, as I said, there are objective, high-quality standards in the response from law enforcement, but making sure that those individuals who are picking up the phone are properly trained. And I know from my after our call last summer, one of the things that I did was I spoke to the senior leadership of the law enforcement community in the country to underline the state of the problem, which I think they do get to their credit. They understand. But it's then taking that understanding and comprehension and actually translating it into the right training, the right response, one that is informed by the very real experiences, the very raw experiences that we're hearing tonight. That's not easy work. There's one other component, though, about this that I think we have been sort of skirting around, and that is the sense of, you know, being civil to one another. Yeah. Like having robust knockdown, drag them out debates, forgive the pun, without the harm, and just really challenging each other. And recognizing that that is one of the engines of our democracy, of progress, and doing it in a way that is respectful of different perspectives.
But
And so, like, I think that, like, there is a sense of, education and civility that has been lost. And I think part of the challenge, not only within government but from all of us, is to really kind of find that sense of, of being, good and kind and compassionate to one another, but without in any way compromising a good debate.
I actually have a really good anecdote, just really quickly. I feel
I don't know
bad
if that
for
makes
the people
sense,
who are
but
standing
yeah.
No,
there,
but we will get to the questions.
Yeah, we will get to
We will
you.
get to the
I'll keep
questions.
this tight. But during the Freedom Convoy protests, there was this really, it was the night that the police were moving in and clearing out the protesters. And I told the police I needed to go to my office, and then I accidentally went into the protest. Then I was able to like be on the ground and actually speak to people and see what was going on there, because they weren't letting people in at that point because it was getting really heated. And the reporters who had cameras with them, who were really visible, were just getting surrounded, like they were getting swarmed. I saw one guy trying to unplug a camera sneakily from behind, and there was, I think it was TVA had a crew out, and there was this really big guy who had his like thick glove on his hand, and he kept putting it in front of the lens, which is so frustrating too, because it's like we're trying to report on what's happening here, and you're making it really difficult for the message that you want to get out. I mean, if you want people to hear what you have to say, don't turn off the cameras, don't unplug the cameras that are there on the ground. But this guy, he was yelling, faux, 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 I think that's what it was. So he was saying fake in French, and he was blocking the camera lens. And it was getting really aggressive, and I just kind of forgot that I was there reporting for a second, and I just went up to the guy and I said, hey, ça n'aide pas, ça n'aide pas. I was like telling him it's not helping. And then I like pulled him aside. I was like, you want to talk to a journalist? I'm a journalist. Let's go do an interview. Let's go talk. And I pulled out my camera, on my phone, and I did an interview with him. And I said to him, like, why are you so upset? Why are you yelling at this guy saying fake? Because I can tell you, I have been working with a lot of the people in Ottawa for years, and we're all just doing our best. We're all just human beings. We just want to do a good job telling these stories, including your perspective. And he calmed down over the course of our conversation, because I explained to him, like, we're human beings. That guy who you were blocking the camera of, he's a human, and we're all just trying to do our best, yeah. And over the course of the conversation, he calmed down completely. And and I understand that that's not a situation that would be safe for everyone. It frankly didn't feel totally safe for me in the beginning. But by the end of it, he was just telling me about how, what his wife had been through, what he had been through, and why they believed it was due to vaccines, which was probably a result of misinformation. But, you could tell he really felt this pain because of it. And at the end of our conversation, I felt like we heard each other and we shook hands. And he said that he hates TVA, but he at least said that the rest of us maybe aren't so bad. But yeah, I don't know. It's just I think there is something to trying to hear each other, because I did genuinely hear that man that day, and I felt for him. And I think what we really need to talk about are the people that are putting ideas in people's heads and taking advantage of this information environment where there's so little work done with respect to determining who can just go on the internet and tell lies on huge platforms and make people feel that afraid and that unsafe. Sorry, that was long.
No, that was good.
I wanted to keep it short.
That was... No.
Thank you for sharing your story and all that. I just would like to let you know that as a journalist student, I am also aware that all of you guys are going through a lot of difficulties with online harassment and all that. But while you guys were having a conversation, there was something in mind actually. So Merriam-Webster, they've announced gaslighting as the word of the year in 2022. So my question to you is, would you consider like online gaslighting as a form of cyber harassment for journalists, especially when they're reporting on something? And if so, are media outlets or even Mr. Medicino's team as well, is there any ways that you tackle on the online gaslighting for towards like journalists and so forth? Is there anything that's done or something that you would like to raise that issue to future young journalists like me and some of my colleagues as well?
Oh, you all want me to stop? Type talk? Oh.
Do you feel that that happens to you, Rachel?
The online
the gaslighting?
Yeah.
Well, I think,
I was recently digitally lynched, so yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I went through a digital lynching recently, and you know, the gaslighting happens at all levels. It happens at all levels. It happens with, like I said, I've seen male journalists male journalists have gaslit me. People have gaslit me. Bosses have gaslit me. I mean, I will be honest. If you do not have an institution backing you, you're fucked. You're straight up fucked. And so where you find community, speaking to the other journalist student's question, where I find community is online a lot of times. I can't reach the Black people that I can reach in person in Ottawa, of all places. I can't reach them like I can reach them online. I can't laugh at Black Twitter jokes that make me feel better offline, right? I just want to emphasize that for a lot of us, I know there's like an institutional look at this problem, and then there's us on the ground who have to rely on our communities because we don't have the institutional backing, we don't have their support, who have to do that hard work and have to do that double work. A, to find community, B, to build community, C, to build a name so that we get work, right? And each step of the way we're gaslit for doing it. We're seeking attention, we want followers, we're too loud, you brought this on yourself. The amount of you brought this on yourself vibes that I experience every single minute of the day is incredible, you know? So, and I'm acutely aware of it. So I'm carrying all of that plus the trauma of what happened, right? And yet I'm supposed to come here and act properly. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So people gaslight me into controlling my behavior, into tone policing me, and they're always going to do that with women. And they're especially going to do that with Black women who are supposed to be subservient to whiteness, right? A lot of Black women came here on the West Indian domestic scheme.
Yeah.
You were immigration minister once, right? You know about that.
I brought this up because gaslighting can also serve possibly as like a loophole as well when it comes
Right.
to online harassment.
Right.
That's one of the things I noticed when it came to like social medias, especially like political turmoils or even issues that takes place online, especially Facebook and Twitter, Instagram, and so forth. So that's why I just decide to kind of bring that to the table as
Yeah.
well. So
It's a really big
yeah.
part
Good
of what,
point.
it's a really big part of what's so difficult when you're dealing with this, because I guarantee you, I mean, even if you look, Holly Doan of Blacklocks, she tweeted out the notice for this event, and if you look at the replies to that, they're laughing about the fact that we would want to speak about this, because that is the extent to which they gaslight us. They're telling us that what is happening to us is not happening to us.
Yeah.
You know, I had David Menzies in an email to me and on the Rebel News podcast say that what's happening to me is mean tweets. When I
Yes.
got an email that I was on a hit list and that people were going to pose as unhoused people outside of my house to harass me and attack me. And every time I walked my dog, I was looking over my shoulder. And it's such a bummer too, because I actually have like a pretty good rapport with a lot of the people who are unhoused who live near my place. And like, it sucks to feel unsafe in your own community and to have people then tell you that this thing that took the enjoyment out of that moment after work when I'm unplugged and I'm at the park with my dog and I just like feel safe and comfortable and happy, that I'm looking over my shoulder because I'm getting these threats, and be told that's a mean tweet. Is that a mean tweet? I don't think so. Like, mean tweets are part of it. We absolutely get a lot of mean tweets, but that's not why we're here today. We're here because of the safety issue.
So I just want to quickly say that gaslighting is a societal. Can you hear me? Sorry, I feel like
Yes.
I'm on mute. Okay. Gaslighting it's an online issue, but it's very much permeated in every level of our society. It's just the way we have this culture of victim blaming. We see it in our pop culture. We also see it in our media. When we see certain parts of the media, legitimizing certain narratives that can be harmful to victims, that is a version of gaslighting. So victim blaming is in everything. Look at the way we cover cases like the Amber Heard case, the language, the tonology that was used. So that is a larger conversation. It's not just online. I think that's where newsroom cultures also come in. We talked earlier about having to convince to even our colleagues or people within the newsroom why something is violent or offensive or abusive towards us. We need to start in all of these institutions a way to stop victim blaming, to avoid disproportionate restraint on the speech of women journalists when they come under attack or trying to figure out, but what did you do? I did nothing, absolutely nothing. Makes somebody, makes me deserve somebody saying they've got my face on a list on their wall and they're deciding which of the journalists to retire or to silence or to rape. We need to have that conversation, not just online, just in general. How do we treat victims? What light do we show them in? How do we see them portrayed in movies, in our culture in general? And we have to figure out a more intersectional approach to the nature of violence against, especially against women journalists.
The language of woke, too, I find that's gaslighting to the max, right? And I've seen mainstream media just take that, bloop, bloop. There is no. Give
us an example. That's interesting. Give us an example.
How
of
many
that.
times have you seen headlines of woke when Danielle Smith talks about it? There's no interrogation of that word, but that word comes from Black liberation. It comes from Black liberation movements, and it has been co-opted and adopted and manipulated to gaslight all of us out of fighting for social justice. And there's been no sort of, it's only when I talked about it on Twitter that people were like, whoa, that they took a step back. Because up until now, mainstream media has been using that word as it is used by those people who manipulated that word.
One last question there. It's yours.
Okay. I have a comment and then a question. My comment is I am a grad of Carleton, the journalism program. I was not tough enough to be a journalist. I'm telling you, it is, I admire you very much for doing what you do, especially now. I couldn't do it. And I'm wondering on a human level how this affects you. Like, does it affect your sleep? Your relationships, your lives. I just want to say, plus I admire you as well for being a member of Parliament. I'm a Hansard editor, so I know what you guys go through, so I admire all of you, you guys.
So I think, you know what, that's a good question, and we should go around the table and get an answer from all of you. So, Saba, let's start with you. How has this affected you? Does it affect your sleep? Does it affect...
Joyce, I think that I am now basically operating on muscle memory alone and just playing, we do the job that we do on muscle memory. The rest of me is just still in a lot of shock. I don't think I've processed any of this. Like I mentioned earlier in my opening remarks, it's kind of like from the Chanel Miller's quote, right? You used to live in real time, and now you just slowly evaluate a moment before you step into it. I think we tend to look at stress, trauma, PTSD as primarily emotional, as primarily psychological, but it has a very deep impact on your body, on your health, and that just kind of erodes over time. So, it affects my memory, it affects my blood pressure, other conditions. It takes away from important work that I have to do because, I am often stripped of my words that I need to use to tell that story. And it takes away from what I could contribute, as a voice, as a newcomer in Canada who has a lot to offer in terms of my perspective and my experience reporting in other countries and in other societies, because I don't feel the energy. I'm usually mostly exhausted and in fight or flight mode. Everything that I say or do is weighed against what will happen to me if I do that. So I think it takes away a lot of important and valuable things that I thought I would bring to this country, which I thought that this country welcomes when it welcomes people like me.
Erica.
I don't know. I go in and out. Like, I'm up, I'm down, and I don't really have. I mean, my anxiety is through the roof. I get more panic attacks now. I do have difficulty sleeping sometimes. Depends how much CBD oil I have. A lot of it's anxiety. I now have a little bit more anxiety about walking into spaces. But I'm also really stubborn, and I'm like half mouth. People are always surprised that I'm as short as I am, but I always tell them I'm half mouth. And so I think that for me, I do get a lot of my energy. It's a really sick feedback loop I have, because speaking out and the freedom to speak out about wrongs is just so important to me that I think not being able to do that would make me sicker.
Rachel.
I guess there's maybe 3 things I'll mention. The first one is how distinctly unfair it is. I remember being so mad because I'm trying to do my job. I'm trying to write an article. I'm trying to set up interviews. I'm trying to call people. I'm trying to do research. I'm trying to actually put the words on paper. And because I am a woman, because that's where a lot of this comes from, and a lot of it is targeted in the fact that I'm a woman. They make jokes. It's funny, I joke about the pumpkin spice thing, but it's all kind of rooted in this misogyny, right?
Yeah.
And it's like this added hurdle that I'm getting a call from the police officer in the middle of my day when I'm trying to get my work done, and it's like an hour conversation. And I just can't help but think, man, this is what people this is what white men don't have to deal with to the same extent. It's not interrupting their workday. It's not slowing down their ability. And that's really the substantive impact on the output. And that's where it is successful in making your voices just that little bit smaller, because every minute I'm on the phone with a police officer is a minute I'm not chasing a story. And it's really unfair. The second thing I wanted to mention was moral injury, which is a word I think we've heard a little bit more recently in the last year, especially for frontline workers in the pandemic. But it's sort of this weird shift that starts to happen in how good you feel the world is. When I have to catch myself sometimes, because when I'm really in it and just getting an onslaught of the worst things said, when I'm just trying to write an article about, trans rights, it's really hard to not feel like that's what the world is. And I think you have to kind of take a second and step back from that. Otherwise, it really can dampen your outlook and just make you feel like it just makes your life a little darker. And it's really painful. And then the last thing I'll say is I have never been so goddamn grateful for Zoloft. And I think that we should all be really open about that. I used to have panic attacks my whole life, and I'm so glad that I have medication that is hugely helpful, and that I've had access to the mental health care that's been able to really get me through this. So I just want to say, I'm doing all right for myself in my career so far, and I take medication every single day, and like you guys can totally, yeah, it's the best. It's like a cheat. It's like you're cheating at life because you don't have to deal with all the garbage shit in your head, you know? Sorry, I'm swearing too, but yeah, that's the third thing.
Therapy.
So, Minister,
Yes.
last word to you. Now, you've probably heard this before, probably not this way. How do you get those police officers to take this seriously?
I think it requires a lot of raw candor. I mean, I just want to say how much I appreciate the honesty to be able to absorb what I've heard tonight, because that is certainly going to channel and focus my energy to continue to be a voice for this institution. I admire having learned more about all of the different things. I mean, Erica, you kind of laid out the community, identifying it, building it, and then, you know, Rachel, you identified all of the ways in which putting up with that daily crap takes away time from your ability to actually do the job. Did you want to get that? Oh, it's not you.
That's not mine.
Okay. But I think, look, it is obviously very sober, but also really important and essential that we figure out not only the role of government and obviously law enforcement to uphold the law. Because when you think about, like, the purpose of the law is we enter into a basic covenant with each other about how to treat each other. And I know the second time I'm coming back to this, but as I'm listening more and more, I mean, like, so much of this is has to go back to, like, the basic precepts and principles and values on which we build our communities and our society, and understanding why that has eroded. And the way that it has been imparted tonight has been very illuminating. But the point of the law is that if we don't follow those basic rules that we agree to abide by, then there should be consequences for that, and there should be accountability for that. And I think that's my role in this, is to make sure that law enforcement gets that piece on the basis of the lived experiences that you have shared with me and with this room tonight, in a way that is important for you, for your mental health, for your personal safety, your physical integrity, for the people around you, you know, the people who are your friends and your family, for the community, for the profession, what it means to our democracy. I mean, so that's, I think, what I plan to do with what you've shared, and again, a great admiration for your work. So thank you.
I have to thank you too, actually. We talked about this, Saba. I want to say a special thank you to Irene Gentle, who has been a great ally for us. She is an executive at the Toronto Star. She wrote the letters. She got us together. She can run the hell out of a meeting, I will just say. And she's reached out to me personally, and has made time. And so I just, and has lifted us up on social media too. So I just want to say, if Irene, if you're watching this, or if you're not watching this, thank you very much for your input and everything that you've done.
Well, that's quite an evening, wasn't it? Right? It's our turn to thank you, Rachel, Erica, Saba, for being here, for telling this, you know, for having the guts to do this, actually. Because you're probably going to get some more hate.
It's going to be worse tomorrow. People are already talking about like wanting to
so,
show up.
Right?
Is it a Tuesday?
Exactly. No, it's Thursday. So you know, and I'm sure you made a lot of people understand what you go through, what this means. You've got the minister here. This is an important conversation. You know, what was Catherine Tate saying? It was like drunk driving. I too remember when it wasn't a thing, and when everybody could drive and drink and drive, and it's no longer a thing. So let us all hope that this is where this is going, that it will not be acceptable. Look, we can hope and at least be a little bit optimistic, and give the young people that are here today, this evening, a little bit of hope that actually, things can improve.
Okay.
So there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce. I've tried to stay off the stage to give you the space, but it's kind of my job to thank everyone and to tell you there is a reception out in the atrium waiting for you. But just in closing, a generation ago, news organizations routinely sent reporters into hostile environments, into war zones. I was one of them, unprepared, untrained, with no support, with no backup, with no care in the world when they got back. Those organizations, I'm hoping largely because of people like Sonia, managers have come to realize there has been a shift. They have come to recognize, whether it's their lawyers and their insurance companies that are making them realize this, or whether it's their humanity, they have come to realize as an industry, we cannot do that to our journalists. It's not safe. It's not good for their health. It's not good for our company, for our people to be hurt in this way. We clearly are at the beginning, I think, of that kind of generational shift. We need to have that kind of shift in our industry, in our school, in the way we train the next generation of journalists. So, Saba, I know you mentioned this. I know it's, well, I don't know, because I'm as white and middle-aged as they get. So I'm the poster boy for white privilege. I don't get these messages. I only receive anything anywhere close to this when I happen to poke my head up on Twitter in support of one of you, a comment or retweet or quote. So I don't experience this. And I know I'm assuming it's frustrating to have to be in this testimonial role where you have to tell people over and over again how horrible this is to make people understand. So I apologize for that you have to do that. And I truly hope that we now can move from the phase of testimonial to action, from the beginnings in journalism school through this industry, and just make this stop. So thank you. Events like this are really important to that. Thanks for everyone here and Saba for joining. Thank you everyone in the room who made this happen. CBC Radio Canada and the Stursberg family for supporting it. All the people at Carleton who put this kind of thing together. So thank you very much. Please stick around, join us out in the atrium for some food and some refreshments. So thanks again, everyone.
It was very good. It was very good.
Okay. Seriously?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I look forward to it.
Cool. Because they honestly, 2 women.